like I haven't done anything of my own in so long. I wanted to do my own podcast, so here we are trying to get this thing going. So far, I like it. I like this format, but it's a totally different skill set that is required to make the content really good.
Profanity, guidance on that?
Go ahead. I don't care.
Because the podcast I ran for 2 years was called Unfuck My Business. So we, we had a very specific market.
The Web3 space is packed with extraordinarily ambitious characters. Overall, I think we can say that ambition has driven the industry into a level of relevance that only a few big dreamers could envision mere years ago. Today's guest on the latest installment of the Swept podcast is the embodiment of ambition for goals that lift the floodgates and raise all ships in the bay of technological and financial productivity that we find ourselves in. Please welcome Chris Jenkins, known to some as Jinx and to others as the Poctopus. Let's explore his journey from corporate technology to Web3 builder today with your host, that's me, Brian Newar, and see how Pocket Network is doing big things under his tutelage. Jinx, thank you so much for joining today.
Hey, Brian, thanks. It's great to be here. I love talking about these topics.
Me too. That's why we have you on. So let's get things started with an easy one. First, what drove you into Web3? Because you have quite the background, which I hope you can share with us and tell us how were the opportunities in the Web3 space better than in the other places that you were working in.
It's interesting with. I think free speech is probably one of those issues that more than anything has driven my interest and my participation in Web3. Because when we look at the rise of centralized technologies across the internet, I started off in this space when everyone had their own little website that they were building, and we all were sort of in control of what we were doing. And, sharing involved reaching out to other bloggers and trying to work out being on their blog and they were on your blog. It was all very organic. But and forums were great as well because they were, sort of niche little neighborhoods of thought. But as we started to rise up into these centralized global communications platforms in social media, a lot of that went away, and conversation itself started to be aggressively shaped by not just the community standards of those platforms, but also the algorithms in general. You might not get banned for saying something controversial, but your voice can disappear because the algorithm can just derank you and you don't get seen. So when I look at Web3 and decentralized technology in particular, what I see is a landscape where we can actually return to that real mission of free speech online because the users themselves are the owners of the networks that they're communicating on. And so that's kind of the passion side of it for me.
Yeah, the censorship stuff that takes place is it's problematic, and I think what we're finding, at least in America these days, is people are aware of it at the very least, and whether they want to do something about it is one thing, but there is this broad awareness of it, and people generally don't seem to like it. They either don't care or they really, really care, and they don't like it at all.
I think it's interesting that we saw on Reddit in the last couple of weeks that Elon Musk had found some content there distasteful and reached out to the Reddit's senior management, and Reddit started effectively censoring posts that were related to him along the way. I don't think that people ever really understood how few people control what you're able to see and say online, because a lot of these platforms felt like a public commons of sorts. Reddit was one of them where it felt like the users of the site were running the site. They're the mods of the groups and all the rest of that. But at the end of the day, you've got a board, and that board makes the ultimate decision about what gets to be seen and what doesn't. And that's a very small number of very wealthy people generally. And that's not any way to protect speech.
Yeah, I agree with you. And what I found when I first got into Web3, living in Korea, was that the mainstream news they would tell stories, and this was like mid to late 2017, when the Korean crypto traders really started to make headlines, like very legitimately. What was happening in the secondary markets in crypto in Korea, it was very newsworthy stuff. It was moving markets in a tremendous way. But what we saw from our seat here was mainstream media, global, like we're talking AP News, Reuters, all the big names that you know. They would tell stories about what was happening in Korea related to crypto, and it would be so wrong. It was always wrong, and it was always late. They would sometimes tell stories that was weeks old and play it off as if it was a new development in the space, and we would look at it and say that was ages ago. It might as well have been 10 years ago, not 10 days ago. And I saw it again and again. I saw it so much. I thought, they can't be doing this on accident. This has to be on purpose. How could they be so wrong so often? Like once or twice, it kind of makes sense. Maybe there's a language barrier or maybe a lack of understanding, but these are very big news agencies that should be able to fund or have well funded staff to do the research in order to understand the topic. But they didn't. It was again and again and again that they were wrong. And I started to realize that, yeah, it wasn't probably an accident. It was on purpose that they were doing it this way.
Yeah, it's, a lot of people like to talk about an agenda from a political perspective, but I think it's really all much more practical than that. People who own large media organizations are going to go with whatever the wind of the current political landscape is, and they're going to shape the stories they tell around policies and practices that benefit them as a large organization. This sort of concept of the plucky reporter, out there speaking truth to power. That's a cliche that's been dead for decades, all things considered. Most reporters barely have time to write a story to meet the deadlines that they're given. They rarely have access to editors, and they are sometimes just flat out told that that topic isn't interesting to the news desk. It doesn't matter if it's actually newsworthy or not. And I've seen some really great supercuts showing how even like local news channels are all following the same script, and you can superimpose them one over the other and see how they're all saying exactly the same thing. The concepts I think that people think of when they talk about free speech really just kind of ignore the reality of it. And the reality is that most communications platforms have a heavily centralized control of a very small number of people. And until we're able to break past that in a meaningful way, free speech is only a concept.
So in that vein, maybe more from a business perspective, as you're heading operations at Pocket Network, if we're going to take some kind of analysis of the importance of data integrity at the cost of time and monetary resources, how important do you believe data integrity is in this age?
Well, probably more important than it's ever been. It seems like, despite the fact that we have access to all of the world's knowledge at our fingertips, more and more people aren't even qualified to determine what makes for a good data source and what doesn't. When you're getting your political news from, definitely not propaganda.xyz.net, it's people really have very little in the way of media literacy, and it's not something that's taught. And we've moved heavily away from education around critical thinking skills, and all of the supporting media tends to lean in that direction as well. We have a very ice cream and cheeseburger approach to the kind of media that we like to consume. So it's, you've got an audience that's primed for whatever content they agree with or like, and companies that are happy to profit off of that. So I think at some point we have to start focusing on us as the audience ourselves, and how do we become more media literate and understand it better. But then we also have to participate in the solution, and that solution is everybody actually engaging in real conversations and sharing real information in a way that can't be shaped by, corporate overlords, for lack of a better phrase.
So the next few questions I want to ask have a lot to do with Pocket Network. So I think, how about you first tell us what Pocket Network is and what drove you to join along with that team?
Sure. So Pocket is an unstoppable open data network. It relies on a fully permissionless front end and a decentralized back end of over 10,000 nodes around the world that help data relays reach from one place to another. In short order, anytime that you open a wallet or an app or anything along that line in crypto, you are performing what are called RPC requests or relays, basically looking up chain data and returning that to an application. Pocket provides that data in a decentralized fashion. But with our new Shannon upgrade, we've moved beyond just RPC data to being able to support any form of open data as long as it's in JSON format. And that means that a ton of different types of communication that weren't possible in the past are now supported in a decentralized fashion. I did a little development work with the founder, Michael O'Rourke, back in 2017 or so when he first started talking about this, and I had no clue what he meant. All of this was just way over my head. But he was talking about how everyone was using Web3.js to access this chain data as opposed to just running nodes themselves. And it was all being provided by a single provider, and that, this represented a threat to the mission of decentralization. And as it turned out, that provider went down for close to 12 hours later that year, and essentially all of DeFi crashed. You couldn't access anything. And it just really began to expose how centralized this decentralized landscape was. And so I started to become really interested in looking at it and seeing what the potential of decentralization as an architecture was to the future of an open internet. Something that I've been railing about, walled gardens for years. I was a big blogger talking about how Apple was a restrictive environment to be able to work in, because the same reason that they were able to give you such a refined experience was also the reason that they could choose every single word that comes through your device and whether or not you get to read it. And those are real trade-offs. Maybe that's something that people are willing to accept in exchange for a certain experience. But to me, that challenged the very intent and purpose of the internet at large. And so because of being exposed to that with Michael, I started digging deeper and deeper into sort of the philosophy of crypto, which at the time was much more cypherpunk and revolutionary than it is today, where people are just hoping that a presidential fund will pump their meme coin. But, that core mission and that core philosophy was something that resonated deeply with me. I had been in the entrepreneurial space for a long time, founded and exited a couple of companies in the development space. And when they asked me to come on as the advisor for Pocket Network, I was thrilled. It was right in line with what I'd been thinking about. Over the years, I've been a friend to both the core protocol and the companies that work in it, and then also participating or advising multiple other companies in the ecosystem who are building around the protocol. And then this last year, I had the opportunity to help step up and fill some of the gaps from an operational management perspective, becoming head of operations here. My experience with building startups in the past and troubleshooting businesses that were struggling were really needed here to help us get through this final leg, moving from our Morse version, which is essentially a big open beta and has been for years, into our real production version, Shannon, which actually finally meets the core requirements of being fully permissionless on the front side and fully decentralized on the back side.
So being part of Pocket, that it helps you fulfill what you see as the main core, the driving force behind what crypto is all about. Decentralization, lack of censorship, your choice to use the technology the open source technology that is, as you see fit as a builder. And all those things fall in line with how Pocket is providing RPC calls or data to builders and to really anyone who, if you want to use a bridge, you want to use a token bridge, it's going to be a lot of RPC calls for that. You want to wrap tokens, all of those things that DeFi users take for granted are being powered by RPC providers. So there's Alchemy, there's Anchor, there's I guess DRPC Infura. Pocket is another one of those very big ones that are doing that. So with all those big names in mind, and I think that many of the people who would watch this show understand or have heard of those names and may not understand what an RPC is or what it actually does. What they may know is that they've needed to add or remove an RPC provider from their wallet to connect to one chain or another to give them a more stable connection or a less censored or more stable, however they want to characterize it, connection in one way or another. But I think an important distinction is that some are free, some of those connections are free, and some of those are not. So again, thinking from an operational perspective, what is the reasoning behind having some RPC connections be free on some networks, and maybe on the long tail networks they are not free? Why charge for those and not for others?
Well, I think the question is in any service, because we've gotten used to this idea with the internet of, oh, it's free. It's free to use Facebook. It's free to use Twitter. Well, it was free, sort of. These platforms have been free to the users, but somebody was always paying for that. And the question became, who is paying and how? As we've seen with most of the social media platforms, advertising and marketing dollars were who were actually paying, and that's who the customers are, not the actual users of the platform itself. So with RPC, when you think about things like MetaMask, right? The default provider for MetaMask is Infura. If you've never used MetaMask before and you install it to start engaging with DeFi, you're going to be using Infura, and you probably won't even be aware of that. All of that is traffic that's going through their network that they are paying for, or they're being paid by MetaMask for, as the case may be. That's all a very sort of intermingled relationship there. And although you can change those RPC providers, you really kind of have to become an advanced user before you even understand how that's possible. You're always looking at who are the middlemen and where are the dollars being spent in a transaction. I think one of the things that makes Pocket really interesting in being a permissionless network is it removes any need for human interaction at all in those equations. If you acquire Pocket and you stake it on the network for throughput, that's it. The network itself is what's handling the cost of those transactions through burning of your stake. And no one is in the middle that you have to ask permission to be able to access a data source or anything along that line. And so a lot of times now when I'm looking at the ability to use any data type as part of a transaction on Pocket Network, some of the things that I'm thinking about are how can we build completely decentralized chat clients that can use networks like Pocket to have a fully uncensorable communications network? How do you stand up to government communication interference? How do you organize resistance in countries that are, fighting for freedom, so to speak? These kinds of questions are solvable using decentralized technologies like this when we move beyond just a simple RPC request. And so I think that, Pocket invented the decentralized RPC space. They were the first ones out there to do this, to prove out the market, to show that it was possible. And again, Pocket is now another 0 to 1 company in creating the world's first and only fully permissionless, decentralized open data platform. And that takes us way beyond looking up how much ETH is in your wallet. That is any form of data communication back and forth. So I think we are on the edge of there being a whole new class of apps that run in a truly decentralized fashion from top to bottom for core functionality on the internet, not just for DeFi.
So basically, it's the client who decides whether to require a DeFi user or anyone who wants to use the RPC connection to charge them for it. And then if it's not subsidized, then Pocket has an obligation to charge for it based on the business strategy. And if not, then that's just the way the cookie crumbles for some people. It is actually
Yeah,
better.
the
Like,
economics of the network, right, are just buy Pocket, stake it for access, and if you're supplying a data connection, you are paid in Pocket for supporting the relays that you support. So it's entirely driven by the person who wants that data.
okay, then as decentralized AI systems emerge, and surely there are at least some systems, some Web3 based, that is blockchain based AI systems that are using Pocket Network in one way or another, ensuring data provenance and integrity becomes critical, at least in my estimation, it does. Do you think that Pocket is in a position to have to worry about the veracity of the data sources it processes, like the veracity of the blockchain data from one endpoint to another endpoint? Is Pocket Could Pocket be held responsible if that data is not, if it's not true data, or is it something that that Pocket doesn't have to worry about at all because it's just the it's just carrying the data from one point to another?
Yeah, it's. I think those are important questions because we are going to see a lot of that, and who bears responsibility if someone is able to, coordinate a massive flood of bad data that causes trading bots to break, and there's financial loss, or any number of scenarios where automation can go sideways based on the quality of the data that's provided to it. Pocket in this particular instance is like phone lines. You know, you can have whatever kinds of conversations that you want, and if you're plotting a robbery through the phone, well, the phone company's not going to get sued for that. You're just going to go to prison, right? And Pocket has a similar place and a similar role in that transaction. But that being said, the SDKs that we are putting out that allow you to build on top of the protocol is where a lot of possibility for that sort of data filtering and transformation comes from. And I think that as part of being a provider of infrastructure in this space, we have the opportunity to help shape the mindset and some of the thought and communications and philosophy around these applications in order to think about those issues and address them. We actually have an accelerator running right now that our demo day is for on Friday. And all six of the companies in the accelerator are working with LLMs in one way or another. So they're looking at how they can use the Shannon upgrade to access and make use of unstoppable open data. But in doing so, they're also looking at those kinds of questions. How can we verify? And when we move beyond simple LLM requests like what's the price of ETH, and we start looking at retrieval augmented data, RAG, right? Where you're searching or looking at live data from multiple sources, it's important to do some vetting of that data along the way to make sure that you're not just returning garbage. And so while we're not directly responsible for filtering that from a data integrity perspective, I think we are in a place to help contribute to that conversation with our philosophy around those topics to all of the builders who are using our tools to build apps on top of it.
Okay, so basically the communication lines aren't the issue, it's the devices that are using those lines, which can lead to some issues. So the
Yeah, the
messages you,
applications on top of it, right?
yeah, exactly, the applications on top of it. Okay, so you are a huge proponent of decentralization. That's what I'm hearing from you a lot, and what I've seen from elsewhere that you've done podcasts or other literature based on your ideas. That's a great ethos to have. Decentralization is quite important, especially if you're going to be building in the Web3 space. There has to be some respect for decentralization in what you're doing. So, given that, while you emphasize decentralization as a key differentiator from centralized providers, that is centralized, maybe centralized data providers, centralized blockchains, maybe the permission blockchains having maybe some benefits over the decentralized ones, but certainly decentralized permissionless blockchains having a tremendous amount more benefits than the alternative. What strategies does Pocket Network have to compete with the emerging decentralized data solutions or the existing cloud based solutions that might be providing RPC connections as well in terms of speed, cost, and ease of use? So, in short, why should people use Pocket Network now over a centralized option or other cloud-based options?
So I'm
And decentralized ones. I'm sorry, and decentralized
sure,
ones.
yeah. I'm going to use a little analogy here that I love because I think it's so relevant, but it also will appeal to the gamers out there. I was a huge player of an MMORPG called Pirates of the Burning Seas. It had real world sailing physics. I loved that. I actually learned fundamentally how to sail while playing the game, and you could either play in one of the established military navies, English, French, Spanish, or you could play as a pirate who had these sort of ragtag flotillas. And whenever you were facing one of those highly organized navies, think of those as a centralized provider, you had 50 perfectly maximum optimized, maxed out galleons who were, built for war. And they had run military training and they knew how to form these tight circles and how to get into formation. And they were just darn near impossible to actually beat because as a pirate crew, we would have 50 different types of ships of all different sizes, no previous practice. We all just kind of came together and we're like, hurrah, we're going to charge. And sometimes we would win in those battles simply because we were hard to predict about what we were going to do. There were ways that we could be agile as a fleet that they couldn't. They only had one strategy: form a circle, spin around, fire your guns as you turn. And so the ability to move in agile ways that they couldn't would sometimes allow us to get wins out of that. I think about centralized versus decentralized providers in much the same way. We have a pirate fleet of node providers. We can't always guarantee what kind of equipment they're going to have or the level of expertise of the administrators who are running that equipment. Sometimes you're going to get differences in latency or differences in individual node uptime that you wouldn't see if you're dealing with a major centralized provider. Those guys, since they have full control of their stack, much like Apple, they're able to optimize to very, very tiny degrees for things like lowest latency. I think QuickNode is probably one of the better known providers who their pitch is low latency, period. If you need to do high frequency trading, we are going to get that request out and back as fast as is humanly possible. But then you're also bound by that same small group of board of directors who are making the decisions. And you are bound by the regulatory oversight of every country that organization operates in. And as we've seen many, many times, those types of groups will flick a switch without even thinking about you. They don't have any concern about that at all. They're a centralized organization. They are subject to that kind of condition making. And I think probably one of the best examples of this was when MetaMask users in Venezuela suddenly found themselves unable to access their crypto wallets because Infura, as the default provider, fell under regulatory actions that were blocking transactions in Venezuela. And most people didn't even understand that this fully centralized company was at the back of their decentralized wallet. Suddenly it just stopped working. So there are absolutely trade-offs between centralization and decentralization, and frequently it comes down to the polish, some of the finer points. QoS has certainly been an issue at times. But the trade-off is that you get so much more control, so much more access, so much more freedom to operate how you want to, and generally without the concern over arbitrary oversight or arbitrary political influence on a corporation, causing them to shut you off because they don't like your content or whatever, as the case may be. Decentralized providers really give you a hell of a lot more freedom when it comes down to that. How does Pocket stand out from within the pool of decentralized providers is also a good question. I mean, one, we are the OG of the space, so whatever first mover advantage gets you, that's certainly there. But the scope and scale of what Pocket is doing, and especially now with the Shannon upgrade, is so much larger. If you want fully permissionless access with no middlemen, there are no other decentralized options that offer that. You don't have to put your email in and get an API key. You don't have to do any of those things that give the lie to claims of being permissionless. You just go in and stake and use it, period. Second, with the fact that we're transitioning from pure RPC relays to any open data relay, essentially anything that conforms to open API specs, that means that you don't need multiple data sources and providers. You can literally use Pocket as a single API from which to get all of the types of data that you're looking for. So for LLMs in particular, where they're going to be looking at a lot of different types of data, especially as analysis gets more complex, you can't use one of the other RPC providers to look up both the current price of Ethereum and look for all instances of regulatory action being taken around Ethereum within Western Europe from the week of, the 1st to the 14th. Right? That's going to require using different sources to generate that data in order to be able to compile it and feed your answers back to your LLM. With Pocket supporting all open data, you don't need to use multiple sources and multiple channels. You can construct complex queries that are sent out as individual relay requests across the same network and get all your data back in one place. So convenience, among other things.
So does that mean you wouldn't need, you could do that all through one LLM and you wouldn't necessarily need to deploy a whole bunch of AI agents in order to be scraping that different, the data from those different sources? It could all just be from one source, essentially.
Yeah, essentially, if it's a data source or a data type provider that's supported on the network, you can make calls across all of them. And because Pocket is also incentivizing sharing data with the network, we expect that we're going to be able to build a very robust suite of data services, because anyone who's offering open data on the network, you install a Pocket node next to your data and you can start getting paid for sharing that out. So you have literally no reason not to be contributing your data to the open network at large. And with LLMs, they're already using so many different services. Like we have DeepSeek and Llama 2 both running in our test environments on Pocket right now. And we have talked to a number of LLM providers. I'm not going to shout them out here, but y'all know who you are, who are also looking at the ability to run hybrid environments where they're running a blend of a local swarm of DeepSeek and using other, third-party services to generate much more complex results than they could do on their own. And even some of the services that are out there that are themselves acting as load balancers for multiple LLM types are talking to Pocket about how they can use Pocket as their data distribution network to make sure that they can always provide access regardless of network congestion and things along that line. Pocket is, I tell you what, it's been the dirty little secret of a lot of companies out there. I could name names, but they know that if their own networks go down, they need to have a backup that will always be up, and Pocket's always been that. So I think the more we see the need for non-stop data access increase, which I believe it's going to do nothing but continue, the more Pocket is going to become the de facto provider for a lot of these things. We've talked in the past about Pocket just being in the same role as TCP/IP on the internet, something that everyone is using without even knowing it, but it's critical to your ability for data to get through.
So then essentially you're banking on the market for decentralized RPC nodes increasing, if not exponentially, at a very high and steady rate over the course of n number of years, maybe decades, that is going to be how Pocket is able to scale up as a business. That's how it's going to be able to be the leader among any other decentralized RPC node providers. I was wondering about that. Like, what is the long-term goal here? How do you plan on making this a profitable, scaled up company way beyond just like a Web3 project, and you're saying that it's the market that will decide it. Pocket is could Pocket, like if Pocket had requests from 5 million users or 5 million calls per minute, do you think Pocket could handle something like that right now?
I mean, we literally were just running load testing all last week, leading up to 10 billion relays in a day. And the only reason that we haven't tried to push that load testing beyond that is because compute still costs and it's expensive.
Yeah.
10 billion relays as a load test still cost around 25 grand USD from a hard infrastructure cost. So, you know, if somebody wants to sponsor 100 billion relay day, we will do it. We will take that on.
Yeah.
The thing about it being an open market, and that's something else that is a benefit of decentralization, is that we're able to scale up faster than a lot of other folks can from the power of market incentive. If we're seeing a ton of traffic come through, that means providers who are participating in serving that traffic are getting paid more. And we've already seen multiple times in the past where a bull market causing a huge run on data services creates a huge driver for additional participation in the network. We shot all the way up to, I think, 44,000 nodes back in late 21, early 22, because there was such a strong need and demand for data services during that last round of the bull run. And we expect the next one will be the same way.
The cost of data is always the bottleneck, right? Like data is gold. And if you're trying to build a very large project, your biggest upfront cost, or rather your biggest operational expense, is going to be the data. And I don't see that changing maybe ever, unless maybe would you consider the having to update your graphics cards on a regular basis be an operational cost? Like I would consider that capex, because you're going to buy an N100 and probably sit on that for a while, at least a fiscal year, right? It's not going to be worth it to have to replace those things a lot. So like data is still going to be the operational cost to end all operational costs.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, compute units are what most of your budget is probably going to be factored into trying to calculate. Because no matter what your environment, no matter what your hardware, no matter what you're running on or what your end goal is, all of this costs compute. You got to spend CPU cycles, you got to spend GPU cycles, you have to have a place to store that data, and you have to have a way to transmit that data, and you have to have a way to transform that data. And those are all the pieces that have to be considered when you're building into your decentralized stack, or your free speech tech stack, as I like to call that. And so looking around at providers that can work together to help in that goal, I think, is one way to help minimize some of the cost. If you're using storage for your decentralized storage, and you're using a cache for compute or GPU, and you're using Graph to build custom views across some of the data that you're looking at. Maybe you're using Aver or BitTensor to do decentralized LLM requests, and you're using Pocket to serve all that up to both acquire the data and distribute it back out to your users. I think that you are potentially going to be able to use some economies of hybrid scale, moving back and forth between tokenized networks, to come out a little cheaper than what you'll probably run into using some of the major centralized providers. The trade-off for them, obviously, is value add with the ability to guarantee a high SLA and guarantee certain QoSs. But if you're building out in the space and you're working on next level technology now, you can take advantage of these things in the smaller scale without the larger commitments, and get a lot of things running without ever needing to, raise capital, for instance. And I think DeepSeek is just as a product by itself, is a really great example of this, where they looked around at what a lot of the centralized providers of LLM services had done. They looked at some of the successes of smaller swarm type providers like, Llama 2, and they built something that was capable of standing alongside the big boys for a fraction of the cost, and can be run extremely cheaply. And it opens up things like OpenAI to users who would never have been able to afford an annual subscription to that. I think those are great examples of what's possible and what will be necessary in the future. Our next generation of entrepreneurs who are coming out this year and in the coming decade are going to rely on these sorts of environments to be able to operate, because everything just keeps getting more expensive.
I ran the math on this back in January. I think DeepSeek costs 0.0006% of what GPT costs, essentially. And it's comparable. Like and in some, by some measures, it's even better. It tops all the major leading LLMs or other AI projects in some categories, like some aspects of coding. I think it's ranked the best. Like, yeah, and it costs $6 million to do that. Now I think that this actually brings up a good point about data veracity. Like, we can't actually verify that it was $6 million. Like, even if we say, okay, $6 million, let's round that up to 60 million dollars. Even still, even if it's $60 million, that's just one less zero. That
Compared to 100 billion?
Wild, absolutely wild. So I felt kind of bad when DeepSeek got a lot of FUD when it came out with its latest model. Because I'm like, you guys you're missing the point here. Like, you should be celebrating this right now. You completely lost the plot. But it was good that that settled down and people are starting to take DeepSeek very seriously, as they should.
And
At
we've
least
got
in
to
my
look at,
opinion.
I mean, for all the hype around what LLMs are capable of right now, they are still wildly, wildly dumb in many ways. And as an engineer who uses AI on a regular basis to assist with development tasks and all the rest of that, I have some pretty clear lines on what I trust it to do and what I don't trust it to do. I trust it to do simple templating. I trust it to generate some very predictable, standardized approaches to problem solving. I do not in any way trust it to debug, and I personally have gone down the hallucination hellhole multiple times where it begins suggesting a series of changes in which you're going to rewrite your entire application and still not solve the actual core bug. But as this technology continues to grow, and most importantly, as we start being able to operate with meta LLMs, where you have multiple LLM models that are working together to share and pool their abilities to solve more complex problems, I think we start to get closer to that, sort of fabled singularity that everyone has talked about. And AI actually becomes a very useful daily tool for anyone who is savvy enough to be a software engineer. But that's going to require heavier usage of data. It's going to require heavier usage of real-time data, which is the important part. Sometimes seconds matter. And if you've got network congestion that is taking a service offline for 3 or 4 or 5 minutes, that's enough time for thousands of agentic transactions to fail, millions. And the impact of that just really can't be overstated. Network congestion has caused hundreds of millions in losses for traders who couldn't close a position on time. And when you start talking about using LLMs and other automated services for more mission critical aspects than just throwing monkey ape tokens around, the need for unstoppable real-time data becomes so much more critical.
Again, data is the major bottleneck here, and having a decentralized option will help, I believe. But you're still going to be in competition with the centralized big boys who have been proven to be good, or I should say, reliable to the best of their capabilities. That you don't get to be as big as some of them are without being good, right? At least in most cases. You have had some success in building the Poctopus and Poctopool communities and brands. What are the core principles you apply when fostering that community engagement? And how do you see the role of community evolving as Pocket Network scales post Shannon?
With when I first showed up in the community around Pocket, there wasn't any sort of organized community at large. There was basically a Telegram group where people would just kind of ask random questions and rarely did they ever get answered. And I struggled when we first put together our Pocket nodes, trying to get them running. There were no snazzy, easy installers or anything else. We had a binary that we pulled out of a repo with very little instructions and tried to get it set up and working. And we're holding our breath the whole time to make sure that we didn't accidentally burn our tokens by doing it wrong. It was terrifying. And so once I got to the point that I was able to do that reasonably well, along with my engineering partner, I made sure that no one else felt that way again. I was in the groups every day participating, and that's the biggest rule about communities. You have to show up. You're not going to have that effect if you're just hiring a rando mod who is already administering 50 other Web3 groups, who doesn't know about your ecosystem, who doesn't know about your product. You have to show up every day. You have to have the answers. You have to understand the questions that are being asked and understand your project well enough to reasonably answer them. And if you can't do that, then you at the least have to have the ear of the critical people within the project that can answer those questions for you and become a funnel for those questions so that the community can get engagement. People like being part of a project. They like being part of a community. And if they're interested in what you're doing and they find a welcoming environment around it, they will quickly become your champions to that degree. And I've tried to do that in every project that I work with that I believe in. I don't take community roles in projects that I don't, because that just is entirely too much mental stress, I think, trying to play a role around something you don't believe in. But and the energy and enthusiasm that I've brought to those things has worked to help drive community engagement across all the projects that I've been involved in. There's certainly an arc to community. You'll see that follow along with the same bull and bear cycles in the market. You will be everybody's hero while the market is up. You will be everybody's villain while the market is down. You will be the horrible scammer jerk who doesn't care about anything. I mean, I've been called every name in the book at this point. And so you have to have thick skin around that. But the power of community is supremely important to Web3 projects, because they multiply your ability to communicate about the project at large. They're the ones who are going to see questions that you don't. They're the ones who are going to be up on X and see that somebody is like, hey, can I use Pocket to do this? And they'll be the ones to answer that question. So you multiply your eyes and your ears and your voice by every single person who considers themselves a valued member of your community. And with the Shannon launch and us being able to open up, across so many additional data types, that means that now we're not just focused on blockchain community members. We want to get clinical researchers. We want to get teachers. We want to get, people who build all sorts of apps. I'm looking at communications clients, looking at AI models of 1,000 different types, communities who have never looked at blockchain at all, but who are involved with decentralized compute and decentralized data distribution. The size of the community that we want to build is orders of magnitude larger than what we've seen so far.
In AI specifically, how do you see the use cases for AI evolving or being fulfilled with new tooling or infrastructure over the course of the next year?
It's interesting. There's some pretty broad arguments about the role of AI, and I know which camp I fit into. I have heard multiple times about AI replacing software engineers. I think that is a silly idea. AI, our LLMs essentially are taking input and turning that into output, and they are doing it according to the iteration of the data tree or logic tree that they're following. Sometimes they do a good job, sometimes they don't. And if you're not a software engineer, you are likely not going to have the expertise required to understand if they've done a good job on the output or not. Prompt engineer, okay, cool, but At the end of the day, you still need somebody to debug it, to provide DevOps, to understand where suggestions or where code can go wrong in the real world. And there's a level of complexity that is inherent in a human brain that is just miles in scope beyond what's possible now. Maybe in the future, maybe we'll see, but we are a long way from that. However, as an assistant, LLMs are great. If every senior software engineer had a junior engineer next to them that could do all the grunt work, everyone would operate so much more quickly. And working with a junior engineer, there's already some expectation of needing to correct things or to fix code to match your style or to, change variables or other little things along the way, which are the kinds of things that you often see in LLM generated code. So it's I am firmly in the camp of sort of the Jarvis approach to LLMs, with them being fantastically qualified helpers that can really accelerate the kinds of things that humans can do, versus the Ultron camp, which is them just having free reign to do whatever they want and replacing humans. I just don't see that happening. But I do think that, much like all technology, if we continue to build it up in service of making our lives easier and making us more productive, that this could be an amazing thing. And I think even a lot of the people who, are extremely negative on AI and LLMs now, whether through, philosophical differences or just a fundamental misunderstanding of how the technology works, in 10 years, I don't think that we're going to be hearing that sort of thing anymore. It's kind of like the conversations around data privacy that used to happen. By the time they were happening broadly in the zeitgeist, the war had been over for 20 years. You don't have any data privacy. That's not a real thing. It hasn't existed for a long time. And it didn't require a government or an evil corporation. You bought a phone and put it in your pocket. It has a camera and a microphone on it, and it tracks your location. You decided to do that. It will be the same way. AI and LLM models and other forms of computational assistance will just be adopted by the consumer marketplace because it's convenient, because it helps, because it makes life easier.
So one of the reasons why you think that AI use cases are going to be roughly limited to assistant roles or other types of second tier roles to what a human can do is because of the limitations of the AI agents themselves, of the basic capabilities of the technologies that have AI underlying them. But what would need to be built for that to be tipped in the other direction?
So it's, one of the things about technology is that it all sort of follows that Moore's law kind of approach to things. Not exactly, but generally there's a logarithmic improvement in technology over time, right? You're able to take all of the things that existed in the previous iteration and bundle them together into a foundation for the next iteration, and that allows you to make significant leaps over what was previously possible. DeepSeek wouldn't have happened if all of this other work hadn't been done in advance to, create the models by which this training and inference data is put together. And so I think that as we start to move into more meta AI and meta LLM models, where you have strong cross model communication between thousands and thousands of individual agentic functions and marketplaces, and that's the kind of thing that Pocket will be great for, because it provides that central data network to allow this kind of cross network communication. You start to get a level of computational power that is 100 to 1,000 times stronger than what we're seeing now. It begins to scale very quickly. The tipping point, the singularity, is seeing the level of creative 0 to 1 type thought that's possible with humans, which just flat out does not exist right now at all. AI is not creative. in the slightest. If you take input into AI and you are looking for creative output, you are getting a mishmash of 1,000 other creatives before you who have generated styles and rules and approaches, and the AI is just looking for the path down that Merkle tree which seems to most fit what you were asking about. There's no actual creativity occurring. And we tend to anthropomorphize AI pretty significantly. I mean, I talk to my tools all the time as though it's a person. It's not, right? But at the end of the day, when you look at how they work, there is no thought, there is no creation, there's not even like great comprehension on a lot of things. I find this frequently when using tools to debug. AI debugging has been maybe 50% reliable at this point, because it just doesn't have that same sort of level of awareness, and not just project awareness, because my JetBrains IDE has great project awareness. It knows what variables I used in other pages or whatever, but the ability to sort of have creative thought about the way that those things work together, and to see where additional optimization might occur, or where some unexpected edge state might occur based on how data is moving from one thing to another. There are things that human brains do that LLMs simply cannot. And when we talk about like sentient AIs, we can barely explain human consciousness right now. The idea that we could duplicate human consciousness in code is just silly. It makes for great sci-fi fodder. I love reading about it. I'm very entertained by media that presents that as a concept. But from an actual engineering perspective, I mean, we could potentially be decades to centuries away from anything that resembles that in the slightest. So, you know, I do think that it is possible that we will reach that someday, but not before we figure out how it works in our own brains.
Well, Jinx, I really appreciate your time today. Pleasure talking with you about Pocket Network, about Poxipus, about AI, and all those other great things that you've been involved with over the years. You're welcome back anytime. And again, thanks for sharing your time with us.
You got it. And happy to come back and talk some more. I'm always a fan of nerding out on a Monday morning.